So, you know how sometimes the most important stuff is hidden in the fine print? Well, it turns out that's exactly what's happening with a recent EU-U.S. trade deal. There's this one single clause about our cars that's causing a massive controversy. And honestly, it's a perfect example of the devil being in the details, with some really serious life or death consequences. Let's break this down. Yeah, this is the big question, isn't it? Are European roads about to get more dangerous? Because you've got this alliance of major cities and organizations, and they are absolutely sounding the alarm. They're warning that this new agreement could literally turn back the clock on decades of safety progress. So, what in the world is going on? Believe it or not, this whole firestorm, it all comes down to a single, pretty simple sounding concept that's baked right into this trade agreement. It sounds innocent enough on the surface, but let me tell you, the implications are, well, they're anything but. Okay, so the term you need to know is mutual recognition. All it means is that the EU would agree to accept US vehicle standards as, equivalent to its own, and the US would do the same for us. Simple, right? Well, not so fast. Over 75 different civil society organizations are basically shouting from the rooftops that these standards are not equivalent. Not even close. And they're saying this clause could be an absolute disaster. And look, this is not some fringe protest we're talking about. We're talking about major European capitals. We're talking Paris, Brussels, Amsterdam, all joining forces and saying, whoa, hold on a second. They're convinced this move would just throw away Europe's hard-won position as a global leader in making cars safe and protecting the environment. So, you're probably asking, why is this such a big deal? To really get it, we've got to look at the data. Let's actually compare the safety records and the rules on both sides of the Atlantic, because trust me, the numbers tell a story, and it is a stark one. You see, when it comes to road safety, it's like the EU and the US are on two completely different highways, heading in opposite directions. The data shows this gap that it isn't just wide, it is literally getting wider with every single passing year. Just look at these numbers. It's incredible. Since 2010, the EU has managed to get a 36% decrease in road deaths. That is a massive success story, right? Now look at the US. In that same period, road deaths have increased by 30%. These aren't just slightly different trends. They are two fundamentally opposite outcomes. But it gets worse. It gets much, much more alarming when you zero in on the most vulnerable people on our roads. In the US, pedestrian deaths have skyrocketed by a staggering 80% since 2010. 80%. And it's a tragically similar story for cyclists, a 50% increase in deaths over that same time. So you have to ask the crucial question, why? Why is this happening? What is the EU doing so differently? Well, it really comes down to regulation, plain and simple. The EU makes a whole suite of life-saving tech and design features mandatory, things that just aren't required across the board in the US. We're talking about things like automated emergency braking, special protections built into the car to help pedestrians in a crash, and even rules about the basic shape of a car's front end to make it less lethal. Okay, let's use a really current example to make this real. The Tesla Cybertruck. You've seen it, right? With its rigid stainless steel body and all those sharp edges. Well, that vehicle is actually illegal to sell in Europe. And why is that? Because it doesn't have the required deformation zones, what we usually call crumple zones, which are designed to absorb crash energy and protect people, especially pedestrians. This one truck perfectly shows the huge difference in philosophy. And this isn't just about crash safety. The concerns go way beyond that. Critics are warning that accepting weaker US standards could set off a whole chain reaction of bad news for public health and even the European economy. Yeah, think about something like air quality. Right now, the EU is actually moving to regulate pollution from things like brake dust and tire wear for the very first time. At the same exact time, the US is actually weakening its vehicle pollution rules. So if we adopt US standards, it could mean more exposure for everyone here to really dangerous pollutants, stuff that's linked to a whole list of serious health problems, from asthma all the way to cancer. And then you've got the economic threat. The argument from critics goes something like this. If the EU accepts these lower US standards, it suddenly becomes cheaper for car companies, and we're even talking about European brands like BMW and Mercedes, to just build their cars in US plants and ship them over here instead of making them in Europe. That could shift production out of the EU and, you guessed it, lead to major job losses all across the European auto industry and its supply chain. So all of this, it brings European lawmakers to a real crossroads. This isn't just some tiny little tweak to a trade deal. No, this is a massive debate about the very future of European standards and what our priorities really are. This quote from that joint letter we mentioned, it just perfectly sums up the entire opposition's point of view. They say, to accept lower U.S. standards would undo decades of EU progress. For them, this isn't a negotiation, it's a potential U-turn on decades of progress in safety, health, and environmental policy that has, frankly, saved countless lives. So, what are the critics actually asking for? It's pretty simple, really. They are calling on EU lawmakers to just draw a line in the sand. They want a clear, public declaration that the EU's high vehicle standards are not a bargaining chip. They're not up for grabs in any trade negotiation, period. And that really leaves all of us with the ultimate question at the heart of this whole debate, doesn't it? When you're weighing the potential perks of a trade deal against decades of real progress in public health and safety, what do you protect at all costs? What, when it comes right down to it, is truly non-negotiable?